Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's council meeting for Monday, the 28th of May 2018. If we could all stand for the prayer, please. Lord, we ask that you guide us in our decision-making, protect us in the community we serve from all that is evil, and strengthen our unity for the welfare of the city. Amen. I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today, and pay my respects to the elders both past, present and future, for they hold the memories, culture, tradition and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. Thank you. I must advise you that this council meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at this council meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this council meeting, you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. AlburyCity accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this council meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. CM3, conflict of interest declarations received by the Chair and disclosure of political donations. I've not been made aware of any conflict of interest. Mr Ferris?
No, none received.
Just stand by. Councillor Vanderman.
Mr Mayor, the issue I spoke to you about earlier, you're under control.
Yep.
Thank you.
Straight after this item.
Thank you.
Mr Ferris, if you could please do the disclosure of political donations.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Advice to the council meeting. The Environmental Planning Assessment Act 1979, Section 147, requires people submitting a planning application and or submissions regarding a planning application to disclose any reportable political donations and or gifts to any local councillor or employee of council. Reportable political donations and gifts include those of or above $1,000. The disclosure statement forms are available on council's website or from the Customer Service Centre and must be lodged in accordance with the Act. The forms are also available at the back of the chamber during meetings. In dealing with the development applications, councillors need to take into account specific matters contained in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. Accordingly, the provisions of Section 79C1 of that Act are set out in Council Officer's report detailing issues to be considered. The Local Government Act 1993, Section 375A requires that a division be called whenever a motion for a planning decision is put at a meeting of the council or a council committee. Planning decisions mean a decision made in the exercise of a function of council under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979, including a decision relating to a development application, an environmental planning instrument, a development control plan or a development contribution plan under that Act, but not including making of an order under Division 2A of Part 6 of that Act. Matters appearing in the Planning and Development Committee meeting minutes which require a planning decision will be dealt with separately and immediately following the motion for the adoption of the Planning and Development Committee meeting minutes. In respect to these matters, motions from a planning decision put before council will be considered a division and recorded in accordance with Section 375A of the Local Government Act 1993.
Thank you, Mr Ferris. Thank you very much. Councillor Vanderman.
Mr Mayor, can I respectfully suggest that we stand for a minute's silence for the unfortunate victims of the workplace accident at North Gaskoog last week as a mark of respect.
Happy to take that departure from meeting code.
Thank you.
If everyone could stand for a moment, please. Thank you. And may our condolences and best wishes go out to all those impacted by this tragedy. CM4, apologies, we have none. CM5 Merrill Minute, we do not have one. And action plans for noting, 6.1 to 6.4. Did we have an amendment, Mr Ferris, on that one?
Through you, Mr Mayor, is item 6.3, the review of the organisation structure. In the actions that was to be presented to the workshop tonight. As per previous advice, that's been now deferred to the workshop on the 12th of June.
Thank you. Okay. I have a mover and seconder for those, please. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the following action plans be received and noted. 1, actions in progress, and 2, long-term issues, more than 3 months.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, wish to speak to that?
I thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Happy to put that. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Confirmation of minutes from the minutes of the council meeting held on Monday, the 23rd of April 2018 at 6 p.m. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that the minutes of the council meeting held on the 23rd of April 2018 at 6 p.m. be confirmed.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Doxey. Thurley, do you wish to speak to that?
I thank you again, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. There being no question or debate, happy to put that. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM 7.2, the minutes of the extraordinary council meeting held on Monday, the 14th of May 2018 at 6 p.m. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Happy to move the recommendation that the minutes of the extraordinary council meeting held on Monday, 14 May 2018 at 6 p.m. be confirmed.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey, do you wish to speak to that?
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
There being no further debate or question, happy to put that. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Reports from council committees. 8.1, report from the Planning and Development Committee meeting held on Monday, the 14th of May 2018 at 6:39. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you, to move the recommendation as a motion that the recommendation included in the reports from the Planning and Development Committee meeting held on Monday, the 14th of May 2018 be adopted with the exception of item PDC 7.1, Development Application 10.2018.35927.1, 14 lot community title subdivision on lot 9 DP 270349, number 32 White Bank Way, Lake Hume Village, with this matter being dealt with separately. Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you, Councillor Glacken. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken, do you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Happy to put those minutes. All those in favour? Anyone against? Motion is carried. PDC 7.1, the development application 10.2018.35927.1, 14 lot community title subdivision on lot 9 DP 270349, number 32 White Bark Way, Lake Hume Village. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'd like to move that recommendation as a motion as was articulated by yourself just now. With A, receive and note the contents of this report, and B, grant consent to development application 10.2018.35927.1 for a 14-lot neighbourhood subdivision as part of the community scheme at Lake Hume Resort on lot 9 DP 270349, number 32 White Bank Way, Lake Hume Village, subject to the conditions contained in the draft determination included as attachment 3 to this report, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Did you wish to open debate?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Excuse me. There being no debate or questions, I'm happy to put that motion and remind you that it is a division, so leave your hands raised. All those in favour? Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Mack, Councillor Con, Councillor King, Councillor Glacken, Councillor Thurley and Councillor Vandervan. Thank you, councillors. The motion's been carried. CM 8.2, Report from Engineering and Works Committee meeting held on Monday the 14th of May 2018. Councillor Vandervan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that the recommendations included in the report from the Engineering and Works Committee meeting held on Monday, 14 May 2018 be adopted.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Vanderven, do you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
No questions or debate. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 8.3, report from Community and Cultural Committee meeting held on Monday the 21st of May at 6 p.m. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that the recommendations included in the report from the Community and Cultural Committee meeting held on Monday the 21st of May 2018 be adopted.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Con, I have someone with a question. Did you wish to open debate on this item at all?
Yes, Mr Mayor, only briefly. Just to note for those listening on the live stream that these recommendations from the Community and Cultural Committee include two highly anticipated master plans by the community. One of those is the South Albury Active Space Master Plan, including 3 beach volleyball courts and an outdoor basketball court, and the other being the skate and BMX strategy, which I know is highly anticipated by our young people. So I look forward to hearing the community's feedback on those master plans.
Thank you, Councillor Con. I have a question from Councillor Cameron. Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the most appropriate member of staff. In the reports is the recommendation that we name the Alexandra Park precinct the Les O'Brien precinct. I'm very supportive of that proposition, but I'd just like to clarify at this point further, if I could, what will be renamed in the precinct. I know I've asked people and they've said, well, the precinct, but what does that comprehend? And if I be a little bit slow, perhaps someone could explain it to me.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. I think that was confused with the Prime article the other night. Mr Jenkins.
Through you, Mr Mayor, in enacting the council resolution, if it's passed tonight, my understanding is that the athletics complex, which is the area in the athletics track and everything inside the 2 metre high wire fence that surrounds the athletics track, will be named in honour of Les O'Brien.
Very good. Thank you for that. Very good answer.
Thank you. Okay, on that note, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 8.4, reports from Finance and Administration Committee meeting held on 21st of May 2018 at 6:25. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that the recommendations included in the report from the Finance and Administration Committee meeting held on Monday the 21st of May 2018 be adopted.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
I would like to second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
No further questions or debate. Happy to put those. All in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. There are no reports from our community forums. We're up to CM10, notice of motion and notice of rescission. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move that Council A allocate a period of up to 30 minutes prior to each ordinary and extraordinary meeting of the Council as a public forum. This forum is for the purpose of hearing verbal submissions from members of the public on items of business to be considered at the meeting, subject to the conditions outlined in Attachment 1. Part B, I'd like to amend Attachment 1 to include the additional condition that persons wanting to speak at a public forum must not breach AlburyCity's procurement policy relating to unauthorised communication and lobbying of councillors with respect to tenders or quotations. Part C, to amend the Code of Meeting Practice to reflect Part A and Attachment 1, and D, be prepared to commence this arrangement during the August meeting cycle.
Thank you, Councillor Con. I have Councillor Stutchbury wishing to second that. Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, you read my mind, Mr Mayor. I wish to second that motion.
Councillor Con, did you wish to open debate?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, this motion is about maximising opportunities for our community to have input into Council's decision-making. We recently had the Micromex Community Satisfaction Survey, and an issue that came up was that residents felt like that we could improve our communication and consultation with the community. We've taken fantastic steps forward in this term of Council's with the live streaming of the meetings, and I think this is another step that will enable people's voices to be heard in this chamber. It's already common practice across New South Wales, and it's actually recommended practice by the Office of Local Government in their draft Code of Meeting Practice. And I've considered input from other councillors and staff in drafting the conditions in Attachment 1. So there's quite a long list of conditions that people need to meet, and I hope that that will enable people to have a say and also for us to maintain order at our meetings. And I hope other councillors will consider the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Con. I have 2 questions and a speaker for and against. I'll take the questions. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. Through you to the most relevant member of staff, what time would the meetings, what time is it proposed that the meetings would start, and therefore what time would these sessions commence, noting it's up to 30 minutes?
Mr. Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, if it's the desire of council, we could start them at 6 p.m. as usual, work through the presentations and then continue straight on with the council meeting afterwards.
Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. Can I just clarify then how that would be enacted, how the meeting procedure would be adapted to suit?
Yeah.
Sit in this information, so if the staff could determine how we'll deal with that. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Con, happy to answer that
I'm
question.
happy to answer that question, which I believe is answered in attachment 1. The idea is that the public forum would take place before we commence the official meetings of our council meeting, and that's in accordance with the Office of Local Government guidelines. So this would take place before we commence our official proceedings. It's allocated up to 30 minutes, so in the event that there are no speakers registered on a certain day, we would just start our meeting at 6 p.m. as usual, and if there are speakers registered, we'll hear those presentations and then start our official meeting either when those presentations are finished or after 30 minutes have passed.
Councillor Glacken, you comfortable with that?
Yes, so if I could just confirm that it would be implicit in the councillor meeting practice that goes out on display that the meeting, whether it's commenced with public forum or not, will commence at 6 p.m. either way.
Yep. Councillor Con, is that your
Thanks,
intention?
Councillor Glacken. Yes, that was the intention.
Thank you. So, Councillor Stutchbury, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I intend to speak for and vote for this motion, but I do have a question regarding the draft conditions. I think it's in condition number 2 is that a person wishing to speak should make an application by midday on the day of the meeting. But then condition number I'll find it in a moment. Condition number 6, yes, the audio visual requires 24 hours notice. I'm not quite sure how that's going to work. Could that be clarified for me, please?
I'm happy to take that question. In drafting the conditions, I based them on other councils around New South Wales and in confirmation with the General Manager that midday of the day of the meeting would be sufficient as a final deadline to formalise a list of speakers. But if they require PowerPoints or other things like that to be uploaded into our system, that the staff wanted some additional time to look through that material and check it and make sure that it's available, and they didn't want to do that on the afternoon on the day. So people would be required to give 24 hours notice if they were including audiovisual materials, but up until midday on the day would be fine without anything.
Comfortable with that, Councillor Stutchbury?
Very.
Thank you. Councillor, you've opened debate, Councillor Con?
Yes, I have.
Yes. Councillor Stutchbury, did you wish to speak for that now, or did you wish to hold your...
I'm happy to speak for, or I can wait my turn. I hadn't actually pushed the
I've
button.
got a speaker against, so I'll start with
let's
the
hear
speaker
that
against.
then. Yeah.
Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I find it extraordinary that we're proposing to do this, and we've had to come up with about, I think at last count 11, plus another one, of things that we need to be careful of when we're getting people to speak. Surely there's enough consultation processes already over the last 5 to 6 years. Our consultation with our community has increased markedly. We've got opportunities for community forums which are taken up when there are issues of public concern that they want to raise their issues directly to council. The issue around 5 minutes to address the council, and then if there's any questions, 2 minutes per question. How do we know when these meetings or these addresses are going to finish? Personally, I think that this is a step too far, and I'll be voting against this. As I said, I believe that there's enough opportunities. My emails and my phone says there's enough opportunity for people to make direct submissions to councillors should they wish to do that. And I see absolutely no reason for us to provide if you like, a fruit box for somebody to stand on prior to becoming a candidate for a local election, or to pursue issues which they find very difficult to let go. So basically they could be vexatious to an extent that it delays our council meetings to such an extent that it would serve no useful purpose. So I'd prefer not to give them an opportunity. There's enough opportunities now for people to make submissions to individual councillors, to council, and I've seen over the 14 years that I've been here now that if there's an issue that's strong enough for the people, for the public, they attend here and they make their voice known. I don't think we need them to address the council prior to a meeting to get us to try and change our minds over any particular issue. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. Speaker 4, Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, in response to Councillor Vanderven's comment that he's concerned about people who might use this as a soap box or a fruit box, or that they might be vexatious or they might be making some sort of political stance, I think that he and all of us need to remember that these presentations will be vetted by staff. They are and only confirmed as going ahead on midday of the day of the meeting. Yes. Yes, they're.
There's no vetting by staff of these. People just need to let them know they want to make a submission to council.
I think that is the case. Councillor Con, did you wish to
Thank you.
clarify?
Yes, happy to clarify based on the attachment. There is not a vetting process by the staff, but candidates standing in local, state or federal elections are not permitted to speak as per the conditions in attachment 1.
Question, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Vanderman.
So if they haven't announced their nomination to be a council, a candidate yet, surely you don't have to announce that until 6 weeks before an election. So prior to that, the 18 months beforehand, it's open slather for anybody to stand up on that fruit box. So it's wrong.
Councillor Vanderven has already spoken in the debate. He does not have the opportunity to speak twice.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. I'll take that on board. Councillor Vanderman, did you have a question at the end of that?
Yes.
No.
Yes, I did.
Your point of order is carried, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Stutchbury, did you wish to continue with your debating item?
Yes, I do. I withdraw my comment that the items are vetted, but certainly the
I was just
encouragement. Yes, the people who are going to speak would need to indicate when applying to speak on the evening that on which agenda item they're going to speak on, and if they have a presentation, that presentation is uploaded onto the system. So I think there's ample opportunity to determine who may or may not be vexatious. Now, getting back to my actual thoughts on this. I'm going to briefly descend into anecdote, and this is in no way a criticism of any council staff of this council. I am a member of a community group in another LGA, and we regularly attend those council meetings and regularly give what are known as deputations, which are 5-minute verbal plus or minus PowerPoint presentations prior to the meeting, and they frequently contain information relevant to councillors which have not been previously granted access to by either the staff or the consultants who are relevant to the agenda item. It is an opportunity for a resident or ratepayer or community interest group to present us with some information which we may not have access to. That is all that it is. It's not a soapbox. intended for vexatious use. It's intended to impart to us information that we may not, in fact, have been granted access to. And that is why I support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Speaker against, Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you. I speak against this because I, like Councillor Van der Ven, believe that there is ample opportunity for members of the community already to come and speak with councillors, either individually or singularly or a number of councillors, to make representation. One of the concerns I have is that whilst Councillor Stutchbury believes that it's an opportunity for people to present information that has not otherwise possibly been made available to councillors, it then leaves us open to the issue of the information not being able to be verified or checked prior to the possibility of a council making a determination at the meeting that would be immediately following. Whereas at the moment, if we are approached by members of the community and given pieces of information, we are able to have that information verified or checked, or we can make our own inquiries in anticipation of the meeting at which this item, whatever this item will be, is discussed. And we can also make that information available to the staff so that they can verify that information, or indeed often incorporate that information into the reports that we are presented with. And so I have concerns with, one, people already have sufficient opportunity to meet with us and to meet with our staff. I believe that the information, whilst it could well be new and not otherwise made available to us as councillors, is information that we cannot necessarily rely upon, and may be information that we use during that meeting to make determinations. So I am very cautious about that. I'm also concerned that we will end up with, albeit unintentionally, people who have not been vetted, because it's not possible for the staff to vet what they may or may not say, and that we could have unintentional consequences, negative consequences of the presentations being made. And I don't think that all members of our community would wish to make representation prior to the meetings. There will be a certain number of people who would be happy to do so, but there will be a significant number of people who will not. And I'm not convinced that they will get an equal opportunity to make their point publicly as they would be doing so here for that selected few. So no, I cannot support this here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gluckin. Of the Speaker for, Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Unlike some of Councillor Con's ideas, I'm happy to support this one. And I'm going to explain why. One of the minor frustrations I find, and other councillors may not find this, is the code of conduct. We are compelled, when fulfilling our official functions, not at all other times, but when fulfilling our official functions, to treat all people with respect. And that's an unqualified requirement. No matter how testing, no matter how much you're abused, no matter how inflammatory people are, no matter how rude they are, when performing our official duties, we're required to treat them with respect. But it's not a two-way street, as we've found. And in recent months, we've seen some behaviour from some people in our community, and more from Wodonga, I might add, in the chamber, in the seating area, that has been outrageous, frankly outrageous. And catcalling, swearing, abuse as they storm from the chamber. These people are an absolute disgrace in my view. I will support this motion because I believe a better way to deal with people who want to have a chop at council or councillors or want to say something is to give them a forum under which they are invited to participate under the same requirements that we are, and to participate with the subject to the same standards as we are subject to. And let's see them get up behind that microphone and put their case, instead of sitting in the chamber, in the audience section, making snide comments, swearing and carrying on in an unacceptable fashion. I think it will improve the level of civic debate in our city, and I'm happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. No speakers against. Speaker for, Councillor King.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'm supporting this. I think it's an opportunity for people to speak. I hardly think it's going to descend into a scene off Life of Brian, but I also think that in 6 months' time, if it hasn't worked, then Councillor Vanderven and the other councillors that vote against it can actually bring it up as another motion and it can stop. So my philosophy is if nothing changes, nothing changes. So I'm supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor King. No speakers against. Speaker for, Councillor Thurley.
Very briefly, Mr Mayor, the conditions are very clear, very strict, very well set out. It's 30 minutes tops. It cannot go over 30 minutes. If someone is still speaking at 29 minutes and 59 seconds, they will be stopped. The whole issue is 30 minutes. You can say we've got plenty of communication methods. Well, what's wrong with one more? It's a great opportunity, and as I do agree with Councillor Cameron that people, when making comments, will have to conform to the code of meeting practice that we are all required to conform to, and I think it will provide us an opportunity to listen more carefully to people. I can't help it if only some people turn up here. That doesn't mean that others have been disadvantaged. They all have the opportunity. It's the same as councillors, the public who send me emails. Some do, some don't. It's a matter of providing as many possible opportunities as we can for people to get in touch with their council and their councillors. And I think it's a great idea. I don't see virtually any difficulties with it at all.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Just before I hand to Councillor Con, there are no speakers for or against, no questions. Happy to finish with my own view on this particular item. I think as a council in the 6 years I've been on council, the council has progressed and certainly worked really hard to communicate with our community, and it is certainly a challenge to offer the opportunities for our community to greet councils and certainly have their view on specific items. We hold public forums, community forums, we have your say, we get out in the street, we have pop-ups, we do all this stuff, and yet the Micromex survey says we still don't do enough. I think in the last 2 years of council there's been a degree of openness and transparency that hasn't been seen before, even though we have been transparent and open, live streaming. This opportunity is yet another great opportunity to demonstrate to our community and certainly to other council communities that we're prepared to listen and we're prepared to use this as an opportunity to say to our community, we're open for business. So they come to us all the time. They're always happy to criticise. I agree with Councillor Thurley and others that let them stand in this chamber and abide by the code and tell us their feelings and certainly indicate they're for or against in terms of items of business. So I support the motion. Councillor Con, did you wish to have a question first? Councillor Vanderven.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question relates to around the KPIs for this. Councillor King suggested if it doesn't work in 6 months that we go back. What would a decent KPI for this be as far as the success, considering we've got 22,500 ratepayers? How many people addressing this council would you consider it to be a success in terms of greater community consultation?
I would have thought, though, it wouldn't be measured by the success but the failure. And if there aren't people here, at least we've given them the opportunity to speak. But I'm happy to open that to Councillor Con for her view and answer that question.
Thanks for the very difficult question. We've had previous changes to the Code of Meeting Practice that didn't require any KPIs. This is something that I believe we should do. If other councillors believe that it's a problem, then they're welcome to move their own notices of motion in time to amend the Code of Meeting Practice. I'm not suggesting any kind of numerical measurement.
Thank you.
No problem. Councillor Con, happy for you to close debate.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I think some of the fears of my fellow councillors in terms of unintended consequences are fairly unfounded. This is a recommended practice by the Office of Local Government, and at a quick Google, I came up with the non-exhaustive list of other councils that already do this. That includes Bellingen, Campbelltown, Hornsby, Snowy Monaro, Kiama, Shoalhaven, Wollongong and Inner West. This is not a particularly radical concept, and those communities have really embraced the opportunity. I get as many emails and phone calls as other councillors, but I've also heard from people that they want to have a greater voice. And Councillor Glacken is right. Some people might want to address us publicly. Some people might choose not to. Some people are happy to email councillors, some aren't. Some people are happy to phone individual councillors and some aren't. I think giving the maximum number of opportunities for people to have their say is really important. And it's certainly something I've heard from the community is that they want to be able to have a say in this space. I think it's important to provide that opportunity. We do occasionally have public forums, but they've been for particularly major controversial items where there are a large number of people willing to speak. This opportunity will give one or two people the opportunity to speak to particular items without us having to organise a whole separate event to do that. So I thank fellow councillors for your support and I commend the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Con. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Presentation of deputations. I have none. CM12 reports and minutes of committees and working parties. There are none. Documents of sealing. Thank you, Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. To move the recommendation as a motion that Council authorises its seal to be affixed to the documents outlined below in the presence of two signatories affixed to the authorised to affix the seal pursuant to Regulation 400 Local Government General Regulation 2005 and use of the Council seal policy, Regional Growth, Environment and Tourism Fund, Murray River Regional Experiences, Combined Restart New South Wales Funding Deed incorporating AlburyCity, Berrigan and Federation Councils 3-year project works to commence 1 August 2018. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Seconder? Councillor Vanderman.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken, do you wish to speak to that? Thank you. Happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM14 Officers' Reports for consideration. CM14.1 Alternative Options for Biosolids Transportation and Disposal Contract number 17/01917. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll move the recommendation the Council accept the tender submission from Arkwood Organic Recycling Proprietary Limited for schedule of rates contract number 17/01917, alternative options for biosolids transportation and disposal with an estimated cost of $1,796,216, including GST, over the 3-year contract term.
Councillor Glacken.
Happy to second.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to open debate on that item?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There was some concern, I think, with some fellow councillors about another option, but I had a really good study of this particular report by council staff, and I believe that what we have here is the most advantageous tender for council, as well as the situation where these people are have a fantastic reputation Australia-wide, or at least on the eastern seaboard, for the work that they're proposing to perform for us. I note on page 49 of our electronic copy that the 6-month setup time for on-site facilities has been based on the methodologies provided in each of the submissions received the proposed on-site facility. So the staff are saying that should we go for any other option but the one that's been recommended by the staff, it could take up to 12 months to get EPA approval. So we've still got a situation where it could cost us another $1.4 million in the next 12 months while this is all sorted out. To have this, the biosolids removed from our site appears to be the most cost-effective solution for council. I don't think there are any concerns from my perspective on the environmental impacts that this is going to have. People will argue that transporting the stuff off-site is not the most preferred option, but we're doing it now and have done for 2 or 3 years with because of the other issues with our waste contract. So I don't see any difference with this. And as I note from the report that the saving, if we go with this particular Arkwood Organic Recycling Proprietary Limited tender, will save council approximately 2.2 million over the 3-year tender period. And I think with other things going on, it's a very good outcome. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderin. I have 2 speakers against, but I have a question. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of technical questions. I presume they'll be.
Yes, Councillor Cameron.
I'm sorry if I'm wrong, but was there a seconder?
Yeah, there was a second.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Glacken. Councillor Thurley, continue.
Yeah, thank you. I presume there will be addressed to Mr. Ferris. A couple of things. I note that the present solids content that you've quoted, is quoted in the report, is 12 to 15% solids. Has council got anything in our forward plan to look at different treatment methods which would raise the solids content of our biosludge?
Mr. Ferris.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly we appreciate that the current belt press system is a 20-year-old system, and there is a lot more modern and more technologically advanced processes now where you can have a higher level of solids in your sludge product. We'll certainly look at them as we design the next stage of Waterview for the upgrade of the treatment plant. Once the upgrade of it's duplicated on site, we'll then upgrade the existing plant as well. So moving forward, you'll see a different system there than the belt press system that exists at the moment.
Follow up, Councillor Thurley.
An additional one. Do staff see any problem transporting a substance with 85% water content over any long distance in a truck? That is, would there be liquefaction of that material caused by road vibration and so on, and therefore leakage from trucks and so on?
Mr. Ferris.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, we don't see an issue with that. The trucks will be specifically designed to obviously take them those distances. We've transported it from Waterview to the landfill over a long period and have limited issues with regard to that.
Thank you, Mr. Ferris. Did you have a follow-up, Councillor Thurley?
Oh, that's fine, thank you.
Question from Councillor Vanderin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to the relevant member of staff. I noticed with the submission from Arkwood that they are going to be doing continuous testing to get a better contamination grade, which is advantageous to us from the point of view of the disposal of the resultant material. Has that been done in the past on a regular basis? As I think they're suggesting they're going to be doing it. I'm just trying to pick up the. They proposed to carry out testing. I'm not sure on what frequency, but to get that better result, has that been done in the past?
Mr. Ferris.
Mr. Mayor, the current practice, given that it's not used, it goes to landfill at the moment. Our testing regime is 2 to 3 times a year. We would test it. Under this alternative, the contractor will need to test before land application for every instance of that. So they will undertake, whichever contractor is selected, they will need to undertake a higher level of testing than currently going to landfill. The issue is obviously between the stabilisation grade at the moment. So contamination grade is C, our stabilisation grade is C. Stabilisation B can be achieved through a number of methods. It may be aeration of the product, maybe just drying the product out, it may be mixing it with other materials.
Further question, Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question again is probably to Mr Ferris. Given that this material after treatment by the contractor will be used on farmlands and other properties, who would be liable for any adverse outcome? Would it be the contractor Arkwood or would it be council?
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the contract's clear that ownership of the product, when it leaves the belt press, transfers to the contractor.
Happy with that, Mr Councillor?
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Question from Councillor King.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, through you. The relevant member of staff, on page 42 of the electronic document, which is the first page of this subject, the product is transported to the Albury Waste Management Centre, where it is landfilled. The current transportation and landfill costs for the management practice in the finished vicinity of $1,339,834. So are we charging ourselves to dump our own bio?
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, that's correct. So the sewer fund is a separate fund to our general fund, with no cross-subsidisation. So the transportation costs are borne by the sewer fund with no income to the general fund, but the disposal costs provide an income to the landfill.
A follow-up?
Yes.
What would the figure be if we took out what we charge ourselves?
Mr Ferris.
Mr Mayor, I'd need to take that on notice, the actual split of the 1.34 million. That's a combination of the transportation costs and the gate charges.
Any further questions, Councillor King?
I don't know whether this is a forum, but I think we should hold off until we get that figure.
Well, that should be the subject of a debate at this point, but I'm happy to take another question. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. If I can ask a further clarifying question in relation to the questions asked by Councillor King, through you to the most relevant member of staff. My understanding is that the components or the business arms of Albury City Council, so the general fund, the water fund, the sewer fund, etc., need to be kept separate for New South Wales government regulatory reasons. So therefore, we cannot cross-subsidise, and therefore the question being asked by Councillor King might be irrelevant to the necessary outcome.
Mr Ferris.
Point of order, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Stutchbury.
I object to Councillor Glacken suggesting that Councillor King's question was irrelevant, and I wanted to apologise for that comment. His question was highly relevant, and that's what I would like her to do.
On what basis, Councillor Stutchbury?
Because this debate is about biosolids and waste disposal. It's not about New South Wales local government regulations, and in any case, I feel that it is poor form for Councillor Glacken to determine that a fellow councillor's question is irrelevant.
Councillor Stutchbury, I seem to think that Councillor Glacken is just wanting clarification on the regulations associated with the funding in our budget in terms of the separate funds. I think there's just clarification, and I think that's fine by me. Mr Ferris, did you wish to answer the question?
Through you, Mr Mayor. As outlined earlier, they are separate funds, so all costs associated with the disposal of the sludge will need to be accounted for in the sewer fund. Any income received at the landfill goes into general fund as the landfill operations sit in general fund. They cannot be cross-subsidised.
Thank you, Mr Ferris. Councillor King, you have another question?
Another question. Well, conversely, and I know with Mr Ferris will have to take it on notice, well, how much, obviously we're a significant customer to ourselves at the waste management plant, how much would our income be reduced by by this accepting the tender from, as recommended in the report. We're costing ourselves money.
Mr Ferris, did you need to take that on notice, or are you happy to answer?
Through you, Mr Mayor, given there's around 8,000 tonnes of product and our landfill gate charges are around the $120 per tonne.
Excuse me, Mr Ferris. Councillor Stutchbury, could you please... Mr Ferris is trying to answer
Would
the
be
question.
in the order of $900,000 of income that generates, albeit our strategy at the Waste Management Centre is obviously to reduce the waste being buried at that site, to halve our waste and to have a beneficial reuse of all waste products.
Councillor, can you comfortable with that response?
Yeah, 900,000, that's reduction.
Councillor Vandervan, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to Mr Ferris, obviously. Oh, well, that's up to you to decide. I'm sorry to be so presumptuous. All of the options as far as the in this tender process are concerned are going to impact on the income to the landfill. Is that correct?
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, certainly all the options are to remove the product from the landfill, reduce our waste, a beneficial use. So regardless of the contractor, we will be in the same situation accepting any contract.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Yes.
Whilst we'll be losing income for every option that we decide on, at the end of the day, we're actually extending the life of our landfill by the fact that we're not putting that 8,500 or 8,250 tonnes of biosolids into our landfill on an annual basis. Is that correct?
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, that's correct, Councillor Vandervan. We bury in the order of 80,000 tonnes of waste per year, so we could take 10% out with this contract straight up.
Thank you, Mr Ferris. Thank you, Councillor Vandervan. We had a speaker for, it's a speaker against. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I speak against this and I would like to foreshadow a motion should this one fail.
Yes, you're foreshadowed. You can continue to speak against.
Right. With the greatest respect to Mr Ferris and his department, this is a pretty ordinary report. And I could spend some time criticising various aspects of it, but the debate has already gone on a long time with questions. And one question I ask myself is, why have there been so many questions before we even started the debate? And the reason is simple. This item hasn't seen the light of day until tonight. It wasn't presented at a previous committee meeting. And it would appear to me that a lot of my fellow councillors have plenty of questions to ask the relevant members of staff prior to making their decision. And I think that this item could have been presented in a better way in the report and could well have come up at either a committee meeting or even a workshop. My prime problem with this staff recommendation is that it looks to me very much like the clean away composting strategy. Let's take our biosolids, stick them in a truck and truck them right out of our LGA, and therefore we have no further responsibility for them. They become someone else's problem, and we can then get on with doing what we do so well here in our own LGA. Well, it hasn't worked for the composting. Our so-called green waste is diesel trucked all over Victoria and New South Wales to be composted elsewhere. And I would suspect that overall it's a negative environmental impact, not a positive one. And the idea of putting a couple of tonnes of biosolids into an EPA-approved truck and sending it to Gunning or Berrigan or Wagga, a bit closer, but still, seems to me to be a very short-sighted approach to dealing with this problem. I wouldn't mind betting that these EPA-approved trucks don't have diesel particulate filters on them. And what's the environmental advantage of taking this biosolids and having it treated after a considerable truck trip in another LGA? I think we should, like our green waste, I think this problem should be dealt with in our own LGA, in our own wastewater treatment plant. The proposal from Synergy Resources option A, I thought was a much better option, perhaps slightly more expensive, but a much better option. We treat it at the wastewater plant. We obtain through this contract some valuable infrastructure for future treatment of the biosolids in our own LGA. We have more control over the entire process. When Cleanaway's negotiations with other LGAs for their composting plant fell through, we were made to look pretty stupid, and we were made to look like we were to blame for it. And I don't think that we want to go through that again. So I will be voting against this motion and foreshadowing something a bit better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchy. Speaker for Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and can I reassure fellow councillors my questions were not because I didn't understand or I didn't have the information. They were quite detailed technical questions to look at what's likely to happen in the future with these biosolids. The truth of the matter is that one way or another it's going to have to be transported off the site, either after it's treated or before it's treated. Now, you could make the argument that transporting it off-site before treatment means it then has to be moved again, and that's true. However, this is a 3-year contract. If we award the contract immediately to Arkwood, then we would almost certainly save, or most likely save at least half the first year's costs of disposal. It's likely that we can get the necessary approvals within 6 months. Anywhere else, it's going to take us up to 12 months. And so we bear that extra cost of $1.339 million for that first year. So overall, in a 3-year contract, that makes any other alternative a little unattractive. The fact that it's only a 3-year contract, the fact that I asked about newer technology for biosolids pressing and water removal means that these options could easily become available within the term of this contract, and at the end of that 3 years we would be in a position to choose a different alternative if this one had not been as good or if there was a better one in the future. So you could make lots of arguments about these two, and I do agree with Councillor Stutch with the two standouts were Arkwood and his alternative, the one that he will suggest. However, I'm comfortable with this one and I will vote in favour of the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Speaker against, Councillor Conn.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think, firstly, it's worth noting that all 5 of the options that we've been presented with are far better than the status quo. This council made a commitment to halving waste going to landfill, and this is an opportunity to recycle organic matter, provide a useful product and stop burying it. So all 5 options are better than the status quo. Like Councillor Stutchbury, I personally feel that we have a responsibility to manage our own waste, and I have concerns that by transporting it elsewhere, we might get into trouble, as we did with Cleanaway, that changes made in other LGAs will affect us. There were more than one option that would provide infrastructure to process the biosolids at our wastewater treatment facility. and one of them, as Councillor Stutchbury mentioned, that would provide us with some valuable infrastructure at the end of the contract. I think that trying to avoid a 6 to 12 month setup period is short-term thinking. I think we should be doing what's going to provide the best long-term benefit, which in my view is the ability to process the product locally, potentially the ability in the long run to provide revenue by selling on a useful product, and not relying on other council areas to process this stuff for us. So I'd rather us take a better look at some of the options that provide on-site processing, and I'll be voting against this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Con. There are no speakers for. I have a speaker against. Councillor King.
Yes, I'm voting against the motion, and I echo the thoughts of Councillor Stutchbury, but I'd also make the point that, what business in their right mind gives away $900,000 a year? And over the period of this contract, that's $2.7 million that we either could save, depending on how we account for it. I'd also like to point out that on one of the submissions by Riverina Biochair that they anticipate, should they be successful in creating 10 new jobs in Albury, and that I would think that if they were going to create 10 jobs, those that were going to build a similar type of facility would have the same amount, and that certainly that Riverina Biochair's submission said that's just the start, and potentially that would grow. So again, I would think that would overlap into the other local submissions. But again, I want to reiterate, $2.7 million giving away over 3 years is ludicrous.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I have a question before I close debate? Councillor Con.
Thank you. My question's through to the relevant member of staff, please, to clarify comments made by Councillor King. The income that's generated by landfilling the biosolids is an expense. My understanding is that's an expense occurred in the sewer fund. So it's not income received by the whole organisation. It's simply a transfer of funds from one of our funds to the other fund.
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, that is correct. It's just a transfer from sewer fund to general fund.
Thank you, Mr Ferris. So we have no further questions or debate. Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to close debate?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding here about, especially perhaps with Councillor King, suggesting we're giving away 900,000. No, I don't think we are. We're continuing on our hard waste program. We're getting rid of 8,000 tonnes of biosolids that currently put into the landfill, extending the life of the landfill as such. And then when we do get stuff into landfill, we're charging those people the appropriate rates to bury their stuff in landfill. Now we'll have more space for that into the future without having to go and build new waste facilities or extend the ones that we've currently got. I think that from an environmental perspective, this is the most beneficial option. We're also talking about, like Riverina Biochar, $6.2 million over 3 years. Well, that's an expensive $200,000 a job that we're providing somebody with. So I think that for value for money, and the fact that we've got 2.2 million favourable over the 3 year terms of this contract will enable us to provide the better technology that Councillor Thurley referred to, where the old belt press is out of date. So we'll have some money to update that equipment as well. And just overall, this is the most advantageous from all perspectives for Albury City. So I recommend this tender to Council for approval.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. Had to put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is lost. Councillor Stutchbury, you foreshadowed an alternative.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council accept the tender submission from Synergy Resource Management Option A for the schedule of rates contract number, I assume it's the same contract number, 17-01917, alternative options for biosolids transportation disposal, with an estimated cost of $2,268,476, including GST, over the 3-year contract term.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Councillor Cameron.
I'd like to second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, did you wish to open debate?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Furthering my comments regarding the document that we've been given to debate this topic tonight, given that it has been well and truly established that the cost of disposing of our biosolids to ourselves is merely the transfer from one fund to another, I think it's disingenuous of staff to include that first column, which includes that cost, mitigating against all of the tenderers other than their favoured tender. I think that's one of the many features of this document which has made it difficult for us to make the right decision tonight. Realistically, the tender from Synergy Resource Management Option A is closer to their actual tender of $1.5 million than our artefactual cost of $2.2 million, because the $669,000 cost is just being transferred from one fund to another. Another aspect of this document that I found unpleasant was that the staff's preferred tenderer, Arkwood, got about a page and a half of what looked to me like pretty much free advertising, whilst the other tenderers got about a paragraph and a half each. And once again, I would reiterate that on a topic as potentially complex and as this, that a bit more effort spent by staff giving us the heads up on it might have been helpful. Just to reiterate my earlier points very briefly, this particular option means that we are managing our own waste in our own LGA, and we're not going to be subject to outside influence. It gives us future infrastructure for continuing to manage this product. And I think, although more expensive than the staff's preferred option, it's better overall for this council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Speaker against, Councillor Vanderman.
I thought I pressed my question button, Mr Mayor.
Question?
If I didn't, I
Question.
wish to speak against, but I've got a couple of questions first.
No worries.
With the Synergy Resource Management, well, first of all, with the Synergy Resource Management, they still have to take it off-site to several farming sites. Can I get an idea of where those farming sites are in the local area? What do they call the local area?
Mr Ferris.
Through Mr Mayor, I need to take that on notice. They've just indicated in their tender that they have some outlets locally that they can dispose of the product once it's been processed and treated on the proposed site at Waterview.
Thank you. Follow up?
No follow-up. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to speak against.
Yes.
Look, I'm quite staggered that Councillor Stutchbury has actually offered this as an alternative. It seems that it's a continuing disregard for the finances of council with a spending of $450,000 over a 3-year period. That's totally unnecessary. I would have thought perhaps, considering his criticism of council staff on this report, that his alternative motion might have been that we get a further report on this detailing and giving each of the companies the same space as what council staff did for the Arkwood submission. So on the basis of the fact that there's a little bit of inconsistency there, there's still diesel particulates being generated by the trucks taking this stuff out to local farms, and the fact that he wasn't happy with the report, he now wants us to accept the fact that we're going to spend another $470,000, I think it is, to accept this tender. I find that whole idea staggering. I still believe that the other option is much more friendly for council, much more cost effective for council. It's environmentally very good for our landfill, and the fact that the proposal from Arkwood are already there's other areas that are the Tweed Heads, Tweed Shire, Redlands City Council, and Unity Water. The stuff has already been collected and taken to other areas or other LGAs. So there's it's quite obvious that the company does a fantastic job with what they do, and it doesn't matter where it's going to another LGA or not, because it's appropriately being dealt with. So I just cannot understand why we need to spend another $450,000. Could we build the shed? Perhaps a question, Dorothy Dixer, to council staff. One, do we need a shed at the end of the 3-year period of time? And B, could we build it for a better price than $480,000? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Van. I had to take that as a rhetorical question, or did you want a response to that?
Oh, no, perhaps Mr. Ferris could indicate, or if you want me to press the question button, happy to.
Happy to, Mr. Ferris, to respond.
Mr. Mayor, we'd certainly be looking for some long-term arrangements. So appreciate that Synergy Resource Management will build and recover the cost of that in the 3-year period. But that facility then would be available for future contracts with regard to the sludge product, managing the sludge product.
Thank you, Mr. Ferris. Councillor Cameron, Speaker 4.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And that answer given by Mr. Ferris just then sums up my support for this proposal over the recommended proposal, although it is a narrow difference in weighing it up from my perspective. Councillor Vandervan is correct. It will be more expensive. However, we will acquire a very significant and useful asset at the end of that. So I think you have to counterbalance that. The qualitative assessments were very close, and I'm happy to support this option, which is option A for Synergy, Synergy Resource Management, I should say, because although it is slightly more expensive, we will be accruing a very significant and useful asset at the end of it. Thank you.
Thank you. No speakers against. Speaker 4, Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, in response to Councillor Vandervan, the financial impact of this is really about whether we're thinking in the short term versus the long term. Over this 3-year contract, it's going to be more expensive. But as Councillor Cameron's enunciated, we're going to end up with an asset, and we can, if this private company can create revenue by on-selling the product, we potentially can in the long run too. And this might be a useful source of diversification for council revenue in the long run. Look, there were a number of options provided to us. In my view, qualitatively, the option from Riverina Biochar was absolutely phenomenal in terms of product and benefit to the local region, but it was seriously expensive. And I think Councillor Stutchbury's found the ideal compromise in selecting the cheapest tender that would provide on-site processing in a closed facility. And I think that's going to offer the best benefit for us moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor Con. There are no questions or speakers for or against. I'm happy for Councillor Stutchbury to close debate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's all been said. It's been a long debate and an interesting one, and I'll look forward to the result.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. CM 14.2, Section 64, Contributions Home Business Provisions. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that council receive and note the content of the report and maintain the current approach of levying Section 64 contributions against home businesses on an individual merits basis.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken.
Happy to second that.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, you should open debate.
I really don't have much to say. We've discussed this matter in a particular case 1 or 2 meetings ago, and I do believe that this recommendation allows us the freedom to assess things on merit, but also sends notice to the community of our intent to levy Section 64 contributions. So we make it quite clear, and we still leave ourselves room to move on a merits basis.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Question from Councillor Vandervan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, through to the relevant member of staff. I noticed from the examples given that some home businesses have been levied extra developer contributions, some have been given discounts. And again, I suppose that goes back to the individual merits basis. On the basis of the fact that some DAs that are coming up later tonight, where we're giving people the credits for existing houses or buildings on properties having already paid the water and sewer infrastructure charges, why aren't we doing the same with this? I mean, these home businesses have already paid those water and sewerage charges. All we're trying to do is levy an extra charge on them on their usage. The basic premise seems to be inconsistent with what we're doing with other properties when they're having a 5-unit subdivision on a property where there's already a building in situ. So I'm just hoping that when
You're
we
asking a question?
yeah, I'm wanting to know, has the issue around the fact that people have already paid their water and sewer rates taken into account when we're assessing these home businesses as far as extra charges are concerned?
Mr Keys.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I appreciate Councillor Vanderven's question. As you'll note in the reports that you referred to later on, each of those residential properties has a credit for an ET, one ET, and that's the same that's applied for a home business. That a home business has a credit on its site for the existing dwelling. The home business is an additional demand, and therefore these charges relate to that additional demand over and above, outside of what a normal residence would impose. So the credit exists, it's taken into account, and as per the other developments that are considered later on, the additional development over and above a normal dwelling on that site is what's being charged or levied, as per our current policy. I'm happy to discuss further if there's more clarification required, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Keys. Councillor Vandervan, you happy with that?
Fine, thanks.
Okay, just one question, Mr Keys, from myself. In relation to the category for this particular practice, it mentions operating with food products or skin-related businesses. Where do hairdressers fit in that?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. It's a good question. As noted in the report, only those businesses with food preparation or skin penetration typically required development consent and therefore brought up in these categories. A hairdressing salon where waxing is involved is technically classified as skin penetration. It's not because of potential accidents with scissors or the like. It is because waxing is a process that is designed to penetrate the skin in the performance of those functions.
Thank you, Mr Keys. Question, Councillor Cameron.
So if that be so, through you, Mr Mayor, to the most appropriate member of staff, that waxing is considered skin penetration, is tattooing, which lodges pigment in the skin, considered penetration, even though it doesn't penetrate the dermal layers?
Through you, Mr Mayor, tattooists, ear piercing, those sorts of practices are all treated and classified as skin penetration. And if they were proposed as part of a home business, then they would fall under this consideration as well.
Well, sure. I'm not going to ask Mr Mayor about massages then. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. Being no further speakers for or against, Councillor Thurley, do you wish to close debate?
I think you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. We're up to item 14. Oh, no, we're not. What do we have to?
I'll need a division.
Yeah, we need division for that last item, I believe. So could we just raise our hands once again, please? We have Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Mack, Councillor Cohen, Councillor King, Councillor Glacken, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Vandervan. Thank you. The motion is passed again. Okay, we're back to 14.3, Draft Code of Meeting Practice. Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move that Council A adopt the draft Code of Meeting Practice for councillors, staff and delegates as attached. B, include the Albury City Code of Meeting Practice for councillors, staff and delegates in the Public Policy Register. C, place the document on the Albury City website. And D, make the necessary amendments to the committees and working parties register.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Councillor Vanderman.
Happy to second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to open debate?
This, I hope, will be a shorter, sharper debate than we have experienced earlier this evening. The committees really, I found unhelpful and took up time. Having 2 council meetings a month, full council meetings a month, is a far better use of our time. We can make twice the number of decisions per month than we could before, and things that are put off to be dealt with at a later date only need to be put off by 2 weeks rather than 4. And for all those potential and actual developers out there worrying that other changes to how DAs are dealt with should be reassured that with 2 council meetings a month, I would sincerely hope that the time taken for DAs to be approved will come back to an acceptable amount of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Councillor Clun, you have a question?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'd actually like to propose an amendment to the mover of the motion, please. That amendment would be to amend Part C1 of the adopted code to councillor workshops will be called by the Mayor and held on the 3rd Monday of each month as scheduled and on other Mondays where required or when requested by 2 or more councillors.
Councillor Stutchbury, happy to accept that?
Can we have that? Is that it there?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Yes, I'm happy with that.
Councillor Vanderman?
I think the only thing that needs to happen is, as far as I'm concerned, is we'll be called by the Mayor. Whenever he wants to have them, I'm happy to go with it. But
Are you comfortable with the 3rd Monday? Under the committee system, we were meeting 3 times a month generally anyway. So are you comfortable with that?
I don't have any issues.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Councillor Gluck, do you wish to speak against?
Yes, I do. Thank you. I won't support and can't support this recommendation as a motion here this evening because I don't support the abolition of the committee meetings and the committee structure we had. And already we've had this evening Councillor Stutchbury complaining that one of the reports where we were asked to make a decision had come to council and unbeknown to him where it had come from. And clearly, if we do utilise the committee structure appropriately, then we have an opportunity for these papers, these reports, to come to council more than once, i.e. they come possibly by a workshop, if not, and if so, they may still come as part of a committee meeting, and then ultimately they would ordinarily come to a council meeting as well. So it gives us a number of opportunities to be able to consider, debate, and ensure that we as a council are making the best decisions possible based on the discussion and the debate and the questions that we ask. To limit ourselves to committee meetings where items may be discussed for the first, possibly the second, but may, as we had tonight, as Councillor Stutchbury believes, we were discussing something for the first time. It's interesting that the works or the program within the report for the biosolids had been discussed a number of times that I'm aware of by councillors, and we had been briefed on the contents of that report previously, so it wasn't really a surprise to me. However, it would have been good had it come to a committee meeting. So I cannot support this new meeting structure program because I believe we need to ensure the greatest number of opportunities for we as councillors to be able to look at reports for initiatives that are coming before us and decisions that we are required to make. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gluckin. Speaker 4, Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I didn't think we'd be having a substantive debate about this tonight because we had it previously and we're now just responding to the complete lack of community feedback about this item. But given that Councillor Gluckin started, I'll reiterate that under the committee system, not everything came to a committee first. Based on the timing of an item, some items would go to a committee meeting first and some would come straight to council, and that was a bit random based on the timing of the availability of information. I think that if we need to have an informal discussion about items before making a decision, the workshop is a far more appropriate place for that than a committee meeting where a decision is meant to be made in that meeting as well. And just potentially to assuage Councillor van der Ven with the intention of the amendment there, previously workshops were usually held on the same night as committee meetings. And now that we're not having committee meetings, I just wanted to provide some clarity and predictability around workshops, which can still be called by the Mayor or 2 or more councillors. But given we previously spent the second and third Monday of the month at committee meetings, and now we have the second Monday of the month as a full council meeting, it seems ideal to keep coming in on the third Monday of the month and have a standalone workshop without decisions to be made on the same night, where we might be far more engaged in the workshop items, and to leave this as a standing calendar item so they're not being called at the last minute.
Thank you, Councillor Con. I have a question from Councillor Doxey before I take a speaker 4.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just for some clarification, please. I'm going to assume that after the second and fourth council weeks, the council meeting, there'll be no workshop after those. It'll be on the third Monday.
Yes, that's as best I understand this point,
you.
unless someone wishes to call 2 councils or there is an urgent one that I need to call or the Mayor of the day needs to call. Councillor Thurley, you wish to speak to 4?
Briefly, Mr Mayor, I mean, the report we had from Blackadder and Associates, I think it gave some figures, and I don't have them right in front of me, but the average time of our committee meetings was down under 10 minutes. They really were not forums for detailed discussion, except on very rare occasions. If we're worried about making a decision at the first council meeting of the month, we can always defer the matter to the second one, and it doesn't mean it waits a whole month. It waits 2 more weeks. So I think this provides us with flexibility. It does overcome potential concerns from developers because twice a month now decisions will be made about development applications. So I commend it.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. There being no speakers 4 or questions, I'm happy for the mover to close debate. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. For fear of shooting myself on the foot, I won't say anything more.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. CM 14.4, Development Application 10.2018.35919.1, 516 Cottoff Street, Lavington, multi-dwelling house, 3 additional residents and garage, front fence and 5-lot community title subdivision. Councillor van der Ven.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll move that Council A receive a note of contents of this report and B, determine that development application 10.2018.35919.1 for the demolition of existing sheds, carport and other structures, retention of the existing residents and construction of additional 3 dwellings and garages and a subsequent 5-lot community title subdivision at 516 Cottoff Street, Lavington be approved, subject to the conditions contained in the draft determination included as attachment 4 to this report.
Thank you, Councillor van der Ven. Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you. Happy to second.
No problem. Councillor van der Ven, do you wish to speak to that?
Yeah, look, this one's straightforward. Just have one question, which I'll just bring forward now to the relevant member of staff through you. There was only one submission received by as far as this application was concerned, and it involved adequate screening of the individual residences within this development. And I'm just making sure that particular concern was addressed in the conditions, the draft conditions. Thank you.
Mr Keys.
Mr Mayor, certainly appreciate the question from Councillor van der Ven. that concern has been covered off in condition D11 in attachment 4, requiring 1.8 metre fence height on the northern boundary.
Comfortable with that, councillor Vanderman? Did you wish to open debate?
No, I'll wait to see if there's any requirement for a closing.
There's no questions or speakers for. Did you wish to close debate?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Happy to put the motion. Remember, this is a division. All those in favour? Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Mate, Councillor Con, Councillor King, Councillor Glucken, Councillor Thurling, Councillor Vanderman. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. CM 14.5, Development Application 10.2017.35830.1. Councillor Glucken.
Thank you, and I'll read from the board. I think it's the right one. Yes. I move the recommendation as a motion that Council A receive and note the contents of the report, and B, that development application 10.2017.35830.1 for multi-dwelling housing in a 5-lot community title subdivision, Lot C, in DP 349356, addressed as 202 Alexandra Street, East Albury, be approved subject to the conditions contained in the draft determination included at attachment 4 to this report.
Thank you, Councillor Glucken. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Glucken, did you wish to speak to that?
No, I reserve my right of reply should there be any.
Will there be no questions or debate? Did you wish to close debate?
No, that's fine, Mr.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. Division. Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Mate, Councillor Con, Councillor King, Councillor Glucken, Councillor Thurling, Councillor Vanderman. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. And I have CM 14.6, the development application 10.2018.35926.1. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A receive and note the contents of this report, and B, determine that development application 10.2017.35926.1 for dual occupancy in a 2-lot Torrens title subdivision at Lot 6 in DP 26768, addressed as 608 East Street, be approved subject to the conditions contained in the draft determination included at attachment 4 of this report, including the following additions. B10, that a landscaping plan detailing planting along the East Street frontage is to be submitted and approved by AlburyCity. The landscaping plan is to provide screening of the proposed colorbond fence from the public domain with suitable shrubs and plantings identified and proposed. And E5, landscaping to the East Street frontage is to be completed and established in accordance with an approved landscape plan.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Happy to second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Con, do you wish to open debate?
Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Just see that
The change. Thank you.
change, because obviously it's significant changes to the original recommendation in the papers.
My
I'd like to have a
pleasure.
look
Sorry
at them
for the
before
oversight. Yep,
deciding one way or the other what I'm going to do.
no problem.
I'll take advantage of that pause to go to the bathroom.
Councillor Vander, are you comfortable now?
Well, I can read it now.
Okay. Councillor Con, Councillor Cameron hasn't returned, but I'm happy for you to open debate.
Would that be a landscaping plan detailing planting along the East Street?
It should be. Thank you, Councillor Vander.
So where do we need to include that?
A landscaping plan detailing rather than detailed.
Oh yeah, a landscaping plan detailing planting along the East Street frontage. Thanks, Bert. There you go. Okay, thank you. Councillor Con, like as I said, it reflects that Councillor Cameron has not returned. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, just to clarify the amendment, I believe this is a very minor amendment rather than a major amendment.
We haven't got a second either.
Oh. Of course, Councillor Touchbury can second it.
Well, not noted there.
Oh, okay. Could we just include that in there? Thank you. There you go. Thank you. Start again, Councillor Con.
All right, now that it's all sorted, I'll reiterate, this is a very minor amendment to the development. Just given that the units are facing the side street, not East Street, East Street becomes the side of the property and the development proposes a big long colour-bond fence. But East Street is a heavily used thoroughfare. It's part of our hospital precinct, and I'm just trying to improve the amenity that this development's going to provide in terms of people accessing East Street and the hospital. A large stretch of colour-bond fence is particularly attractive to to graffiti, and I think that we'd get better public amenity on a very well-used street if we provide some planting in front of the colour-bond fence, and that's all I'm proposing with the amendment to the development.
Thank you, Councillor Con. Councillor Vander, speak for.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, look, this is a good amendment. I had a look at the submission, the only submission received on this particular development application, and whilst I note that the submission was in very clear planning language, and I have some sympathy for the points that the person was trying to make, I think that what we're getting here is a hell of a lot better than what was on that side previously, so I don't have an issue with this at all.
Thank you, Councillor Vander, and Councillor Touchbury. Speaker for.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Very briefly, speaking for the original motion and also the amendment. I just want to express a small degree of disappointment, both as Director of Surgery at Albury-Wodonga Health and as a councillor here in AlburyCity, that these blocks of land adjacent to the hospital haven't been subsumed into some sort of master plan, an actual hospital precinct, because I'm sure in future, when the proposed large hospital redevelopment goes ahead, land around the hospital is going to be in great demand for medical purposes rather than for private residential dwelling purposes. That's all I'd like to say.
Thank you, Councillor Touchbury. There being no further speakers for or against, I'd just like to ask a question. In the past, we've had submissions from different organisations about planning matters, and particularly the planning organisation in this case has submitted on bigger developments such as the waterfront precinct and other areas of the city. Is it usual for them to comment on a private dwelling situation like this, Mr Keys?
Through you, Mr Mayor, anyone's entitled to comment on a DA, and certainly when they have people who request them to prepare a submission, that's usually how they earn their keep. In these instances, they have an interest in that area, and we're asked to provide a submission.
Why I ask is because I'm a little bit sort of semi-confused as to whether or not it's a personal submission or a company submission, that's all, and it doesn't state either way in the letter or the content of the letter.
Through you, Mr Mayor, taken it's on the company letterhead, it represents the company rather than just the author's personal opinion.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Con, did you wish to close debate?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Happy to put the motion. Remember, it is a division. All those in favour? Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Mack, Councillor Con, Councillor King, Councillor Glacken, Councillor Thurley and Councillor Vander, and the motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. CM15, officers' reports for noting, there aren't any. Delegates report for noting, CM16, there aren't any. Notice of urgent business. Councillor Thurley.
Sorry, I was ready for the next one, Mr Mayor.
Oh, okay, sorry. Jumping the gun. CM18, confidential matters. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that council move into confidential to discuss items CM 18.1, Lavington Sports Ground unsuitable soil update, as this is a confidential item exclusive of press or public on the grounds that the matters relate to advice concerning litigation or advice that would otherwise be privileged from production in legal proceedings on the ground of legal professional privilege, Local Government Act 1993, number 30, section 110A 2G.
Thank you. Councillor Gluckin?
Happy to second.
Thank you. And I'm happy to ask if there's any statements, submissions from the public regarding the reasons identified for these confidential items CM 18.1. And there are no submissions received. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried, and we're going into confidential at 7:40 p.m. Thank you.